All right, looks like we're live. So just a heads up, I'm planning on actually editing this video down a little bit for some promotional stuff for podcast sponsors, since that's where I make most of my money these days. But yeah, I wanted to just put this video up so that people can check it out. And so, yeah, I'm going to put it on YouTube and you can kind of go from there. You may notice that I've changed a few things around here. And so you're getting a little different view, and that's fine. Kind of playing with the setup for the video. Anyway, so podcast sponsorships. I have had a lot of podcast sponsors over the years. And over the last little while, it was interesting. Probably 6 months ago, I started hearing from some sponsors saying that they weren't getting the kind of ROI from the sponsorships that they wanted. And so I started thinking, okay, what's the difference between the sponsors that are working and the sponsors that are not working? And because some of them have made a ton of money by sponsoring my podcast. I mean, to the point where I was sitting there going, I wish I had an affiliate account right with them, right? So that I'd get a piece of each sale, because I would have made way more money. And then others, they come in and they want to sponsor, and stuff doesn't work out. Or, and this is the other one, and this drives me crazy, is that people come in and they're like, well, I just want to sponsor one and see if it pays off. Well, I'm sorry, that doesn't work. It does not work at all to run a sponsorship and just sponsor one episode. What you generally have to do is you have to sponsor enough so that people will buy from you and remember to check you out. Because let's face it, I mean, people listen to podcasts while they're doing other things. So if they're in the car driving to work, they can't just, tap something. I'd love to build a podcast app that actually does that, right? Where it's, this episode is sponsored by such and such, and the metadata says, if you tap the screen right now, then it'll remind you to, or, set things up so that you can go check out the sponsor. But that's a totally different thing. Anyway, so what you have to do is you actually have to build up enough association in their head to actually sell them on doing whatever it is that you want to do. Now, there are some exceptions to this, and I can kind of talk about that for a second, but usually still you have to give them some kind of prompt or make some kind of association that you can trigger later in order to get them to come set you up. In other words, it's, you need X, then you get Y, right? So that's what we're talking about here. Now, some of the ones that have worked really well that, maybe we're able to skirt this rule and do like 3 or 4 instead of 6 to 8, which is what I usually recommend sponsorships. Usually they have one of these qualities. Either it has a really, really obvious payoff, and it's something that gets them excited enough to go check it out whenever they get to wherever they're going, or to stop whatever they're doing, or gets them excited enough to pull over and actually check it out on their phone, or stop mowing the lawn or doing the dishes and actually go check it out right now. The other one that seems to work is the sponsorship where you're doing some kind of brand building, right? So it's hey, company A does thing B, and I'll give you examples of these in a minute. But what that actually winds up doing then is it makes that connection in their head, and then when they see the Facebook ad or something else, that triggers them later, then that works for them that way. Or it's just a brand that people already know, right? And so if Apple, for example, sponsored one of my podcasts, they never have, but if they did, right, then that'd be a conversation worth having, where it's okay, we're advertising Apple, and then people would go and just buy Apple. So that's kind of the situation there. But otherwise, what you need to do is you need to build up that brand in their head. And unless you've already done that through other means, it just tends to not work out as well. And so, yeah, so then sponsorships basically boil down to, once you've built the brand, you trigger them and get them to go buy, right? And I want my sponsors to be happy. I want them to get the ROI. And so, I'm just working through this, okay? And this is probably going to result in 5 or 6 other videos that I'm going to wind up putting out. But let me talk about some of the ones that have actually worked, okay? So I think one of the biggest money makers that we ran as a podcast sponsor was Hired.com, okay? And I mean, they were making money like crazy. We were sending them all kinds of people. It was, I can't remember exactly what year it was, but there was definitely room in the job market for people. And Hired actually had a process where people could take a test, then they would put in all of their information, and Hired would match them up with employers, right? And so it was really easy. You could put all your information in, and you'd get that worked out. And if you got hired, then you got a bonus on top of that, right? I think it was $1,000 or $2,000. And anyway, they changed it at one point. And so, it became less and less and less. And incidentally, the amount of their bonus actually affected the effectiveness of their offer. But anyway, so it had a real obvious payoff. I can get a job and I can make $1,000 by getting a job, which is something that I wanted to do anyway, get a job or get a new job. Another one that worked out really well was, Microsoft sponsored a couple of actual episodes, right, where we just talked about their thing, right? So we talked about Visual Studio. We talked about Visual Studio Code, which are both code editors if you're not familiar with what those are. So anyway, it was really terrific because people went and checked it out, but it was Microsoft. It was something that they'd already heard of, right? And so we could just give, granted, a longer message than the 45-second to a minute message that we usually put into sponsorships, but people would go and actually check it out, right? Because it was Microsoft, it was something they'd already heard of, and so it worked, right? But for most companies, and most of the companies that sponsor with us, they tend to be smaller companies, right? And they may have big reach within the communities that we're reaching, because all of our shows are pretty niched. But what winds up happening is that they don't build enough brand. They don't have enough touch points. They don't have those things that just set people off and give them the credibility and make people want to remember to go check them out. And so after sponsoring for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, what happens is they just haven't built up enough of that mental energy to actually get people to go buy. And then the other thing is that they're not working on the trigger, or the trigger is slightly off, right? So another one that was fairly successful the first time they sponsored was Datadog, right? So Datadog sponsored us, and their offer was, come get a free trial and we'll send you a t-shirt, right? And within the first 2 weeks, holy cow, talk about the obvious payoff. People got in, they had tons. They were delighted with us, right? They loved us. And then those people didn't exactly get what they wanted, or do what they wanted, which was stick around and keep paying them, right? And so what happened was, the next time they sponsored, they were looking for the same kind of thing, but then their measurement wasn't people signing up. It was actually people staying and paying them, right? Because that's how they make their money. And so the other thing that I see happens with sponsors that really make it work is that they give the listener something they want, right? And sometimes it's just solving the problem that the company solves anyway, but they give them something they want, and then they continue to build the relationship with them after the initial offering. Okay. So that's what we're talking about here. Now, I've actually been going through a funnel course. That's what got me to start making these videos. How long have we been going? 8-9 minutes. So anyway, so the whole point is that if you can get the listener to give you enough information so that you can build a relationship and you can sell them down the line, then that really helps. But you're not going to build that kind of a relationship. You build the brand and you build the trigger point and you work on that kind of a thing in the ad, but the ad isn't going to sell the ultimate product unless, again, it's something really obvious. Another example of the really obvious one, I'm just going to throw this one out there too. And this was actually not it was not a sponsor. It was actually a friend of mine came on the show and we talked about what his expertise was. And then he happened to have a product that we promoted on the show. And then I sent some follow-up emails, and I think I made $1,000 or so. We sold like $2,000 or $3,000 worth of his product. Right. And so, that worked out because it was an obvious payoff, but we also did the trigger down the line. Right. And so, And I was selling it. He wasn't selling it. So I already had the relationship with the buyer, and that's how that worked, right? So in fact, let me just talk about that for a minute, because I think it's important. And, to talk about these things down the line is that, sorry if you can hear my kids. You've got personal endorsements from podcast hosts. Podcast hosts can actually do a video, sales letters. They can do emails. They can show people how to actually succeed with the product. They can give your offer for them. And at the end of the day, that's what we're looking at, right? Is that's the payoff, and that'll make people want to go buy. But then they can also email their mailing list. They can put it on their social media and things like that. And that way, when people have the brand built up enough in their head, and they trust the person who's given them the message, who's the podcaster, and then they see that trigger, then they'll go buy. And that's really the core, right? That's the core of the thing. That's what's going to get people to work through your sponsorship effectively. So what I want you to do, and I've got a whole bunch more ideas and thoughts and things here, is I want you to think about if you're going to sponsor podcasts, and I think you should, because this is influencer marketing at its finest, right? You get people that are really going to help you build your brand and build a solid, positive association with what you're selling. Then think about, okay, what can I give the listener that they want? A lot of people call this a lead magnet. It could be a free trial. I mean, there are a lot of options, right? But at the end of the day, what can I give them that they want? And then how can I continue to build the relationship beyond the initial offering? And what I recommend is that you actually do that with the help of the people that make the podcast that you're going to sponsor. Because what happens is they can transfer some of that relationship to you, and they can help build that bridge from where they are to where you are. And then you can continue to give them what they want from there. And if you're going to sponsor a podcast, that's what I highly recommend. If you're on the other end, if you're actually taking sponsors for your podcast, then have them watch this and then work through those things with them, right? So then you can start talking about, okay, what stories can we tell? What things can we work through? What lead magnets can we put together? How do we build credibility? What should or shouldn't we offer in the real short ad segment that we put in? I mean, there are all kinds of other things that you can work with, and I'm going to be making a series on this YouTube channel based on that, because I want to give it to my podcast sponsors, but hopefully it'll help you all as well. Be you the podcaster that's going to help them kind of take these steps, or if you're the company that just needs these steps taken. So anyway, that's in a nutshell how to sponsor a podcast. Now I know I left a whole bunch of open loops here where it's, okay, well, how do I do this? How do I do that? How do I do that? How do I do this? I will work through a lot of these in future videos, but for right now, I mean, that's really it. So take advantage of your relationship with your podcaster, have them do walkthroughs and video endorsements and the whole 9 yards for their listeners, and then just see what comes in and see what works. You may have to tweak that marketing funnel a little bit in order to make it work, but at the end of the day, that's what's going to get you what you want. So go check it out. I'll put a few notes in here as well, just to kind of walk you through it. But that's really where the payoff is if you can get people to remember who you are, and then get the podcaster or whoever it is to actually sell it for you, you wind up in a much better place. And then you can work off of the credibility that they lend you to build your own credibility from there. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up, but there you go.